Hello, hello. We are back with another episode of The Money Bear, and I've got my friend Tyler on. Tyler came from Defining Wealth, and he quit his corporate job in America, the corporate American job. I want to say, what was it? It was last year. It wasn't that long after I quit mine.
It was literally probably about a year ago almost this week,
Heck
which I just
yes.
noticed looking at the calendar, which is kinda
Ye-
weird, but
Time for a celebration then.
yeah, right?
Well, I remember because you were going to quit around the same time that I quit, but then Instagram decided to take your account down for like 2 months.
Yeah, when you asked me if there's anything I didn't wanna talk about, I probably should have said that.
You're
That
like,
gives me
"Don't bring
that
it
gives
up."
me the I'm knocking on all the wood I can find around here.
Oh my gosh, it was
I mean, obviously,
so.
you and I don't know if we haven't probably had talked about it in a while, but you and I are probably the 2 that have dealt with all that the most. I feel like that's
Oh
we
yeah.
we built our friendship around,
Being picked
disdain
on.
for
Yeah.
the app and the lack of security, but hopefully that is in the
Yeah.
past.
Well, especially now with like being able to do the Meta Verified, it does give me some peace of
Even if I
mind.
gotta pay for it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, and then, like, I do though remember, like, when that went down because it's stressful for everybody when any creator in our industry gets taken down because it's, like, immediately you're like, "Oh my god, what if that happens to me?" And luckily for most of us, I feel like we get our account back in, like, a few days. Yours was so unique because of, like, the crap that was going on behind the scenes. We don't have to talk about it, but I'm glad you got it back, and now you get to celebrate 1 year of being full-time and defining wealth. So,
100%.
hell yeah. So before we start chatting away, tell the folks who are you, what do you do in real life and on the internet, and yeah, give us your little elevator speech.
Yeah, so I guess the long story short, of course, we can dive into, whatever that you wanna dive more into, but the long story short is, I graduated from college. I'm trying to do the math on this now. I guess it's been 7 almost 7, 8 years ago now. Graduated with $0, started working out of school. I got a degree in finance actually, which is funny because I tell people that 98% of what I know about finance or more is not from that degree, which is actually, I tell people, is actually a good thing for everyone because most people, that's one of the things that people typically say that they think they need, right? Well, I didn't go to school for finance. I'm like, honestly, it's probably better that you didn't because you would have wasted a lot of money and it wouldn't have even helped you accomplish the goal you're trying to accomplish anyway. So,
Hmm.
but for me, I started working in sales, which was kind of not even in my degree in finance. And my thought there was that it would allow me to kind of control and scale my income based on performance, which is a lot of, I guess, my story of how I got to where I ended up going. But I think I just realized quickly when I graduated, probably within 5 to 10 minutes of working in the real world, like, hey, it wasn't that I was like, oh, I don't want to work for a boss or that I don't like the people I work with. It wasn't really that thing. It was just like, is this like my prime existence of living my life to the fullest? Like, is this how I would define it if, defining wealth, I guess, for the next 30, 35 years? And the answer was no. And even though at that time I had no idea what to do from there, I think the biggest thing I had was a problem, right? So I
Hmm.
could kind of clearly define, like, hey, I don't like this, and I'm going to go on a journey to kind of figure out what I need to do that. So that journey over the next 6, 7 years was a lot of self education, a lot of reading, a lot of joining courses and programs, and learning about basic personal finance, the stock market, eventually real estate, and then of course eventually building my own business through social media. And so a combination of all those things allowed me to go from $0 at 22 to, a millionaire at 27, and then 1.5 ish million dollars, depending on what the stock market's doing around now. And yeah, I quit my job about a year ago. And that was kind of from a combination of investments that I had built up through the stocks and through real estate, and then also through building a business around what I enjoy doing, which is coaching, teaching, leading others. And the topic just happens to be, money and investing and all the different things. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. That would be the shortest version that I could possibly give. I'd be more than happy to kind of dive into
Yeah.
anything and
Well,
everything.
we'll dive deep. Well, he said there's nothing off topic, so guys,
Nothing.
get buckle up.
Oh, about to find the
uh,
skeletons.
I know, he's like, "Okay, now I know for future when people ask me if there's anything I don't wanna talk about, thank you for Chloe's experience." That's so cool. I love too that you pointed out, like, yeah, I have a degree in finance, but it didn't teach me about personal finance, and I think that's a big misconception out there is, like, even, I have accountants who, when I was doing one-on-one coaching, who would come in for personal finance help, and it's, like, the last person you would expect to need help with their personal finances is often the people who do need that help. It's, you learn corporate finance is very different than personal finance. Accounting and tax management and tax preparation is very different than personal finance. So I like hearing that because I think it takes the stigma away, where it's like so many of us are like, well, I never learned this. I must be stupid. Or this must be only for people who have those kind of degrees. And it's like, no, I promise you, it's not as hard as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard all the statistics about how many, traders or even actively
Mhm.
managed funds beat passively managed funds. And it just kind of goes to show you that, 80, 90% of people that spend all day, every day on finance, on trading, on learning, researching stocks can't even beat just a basic index. So it just kind of goes to show you that it's not all about, I guess what your perception of being financially knowledgeable is. I mean, I've got friends that are doctors that, smoke cigarettes, right? So it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily, it's not a like an A to A, comparison. And so, but I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of it, or the majority of it, regardless, comes from two things. One, self-education, and two, the hard part is the behavior of actually doing it, right? And so
Hmm.
all those things actually have nothing to do with money. It's more about principles and values and discipline and hard work and challenging your thoughts and mental and physical health. That's all kind of a one big thing. Having the knowledge is one thing, and then actually putting that knowledge into action is another thing. And that's why you
Hmm.
maybe see a CPA that he knows it, right? So his knowledge isn't the problem, but he might not do it, right? So, or
Right.
there might be somebody that is really disciplined and hardworking, and maybe their thing is the gym and they're really in really great shape, but they're really terrible with money, and their missing piece is the knowledge aspect. So you got to
Right.
have really both of them to be able to be successful in, whatever topic, but especially money.
Yeah, for sure. No, I completely agree. And so you were pretty young though when you realized like, is this really what I want? And I think that is a question people don't ask of themselves enough. I think that so many of us, we just kind of think like, well, this is how it is. This is what you do. And I do think millennials at least have done a good job of questioning it a little bit more probably than previous generations. But I'm curious, growing up for you, what was money like in your household growing up? Was it like something that was talked about? Did your parents ever try to teach you anything? Kind of take us back to the beginning of Tyler, baby Tyler.
Yeah, trying to think where to start there. Growing up as a kid, I tell people like I think the most privilege I had was having parents that love me. I had three parents. I had my mom, my dad, and eventually my stepdad. And I think that's the biggest thing, or greatest advantage you could start off in life with, is just having parents that loved you. But when it comes to money, my mom, I'm trying to think back, like there's not really too many memories of us talking about money. It was more so just kind of like very basic, like, hey, you should save some money. I remember like as a kid when I had
Mhm.
like jobs and stuff growing up, I would save money in like, like a just a savings account or like a credit union or whatever, right? I didn't learn about really getting your money to work for you until probably later a little bit in college. Obviously, you learn a little bit with the finance degree, but it's more book type knowledge. And then from there, I learned more about it. But growing up, it was more so just kind of like saving. And now I think back, like, I mean, when I was 16, that was what, 13, 14 years ago. Trying to do the math. That was like 2009. It probably would have been a great time to, even if it was 1,000 or 5,000 or whatever dollars, like that was probably the best time in modern or recent history to be investing. And so it's, I just think like about kind of, if I would have started then, obviously that's kind of a sunken cost fallacy, but there wasn't a lot growing up where we didn't talk about, real estate. We didn't talk about stocks. We didn't talk about 401ks. It was just kind of basic saving. It was
Yeah.
more so about just like, hey, work hard, be a good person, get good grades, go to college, get a job. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But I think that I always tell people, like when I work with people, most of life, there's not really a right or a wrong decision in most things that we do. There's just an aligned decision and unaligned decision. And I think that most people don't understand all of their options when it comes to life in general, or money in general, or work in general, and what that might look like. And so, to your point, I think a lot of people, the internet and really social media and really the last 2 or 3 years has really opened up people's eyes to, your life doesn't have to look like the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. So many different things have changed. So many
Mhm.
opportunities have changed. Obviously, with the pandemic, that turned the whole corporate world on its head. So it's funny to kind of think about that. But yeah, to answer your question, didn't talk much about it growing up. And that's another thing. I always like to kind of break down false beliefs and everything that I do, because I think that if you've got things that are holding you back, like if you genuinely believe like, oh, I'll never be rich because I don't look like this, or I didn't grow up in this neighborhood, or my parents didn't talk about money, or I didn't get a degree in finance, or all the things that you can plug and play into that blank, then it's like, I could give you all the information in the world of how to do it. But if you truly believe deep down that you're not capable of doing it because of some reason that you've come up with in your head, then it's never going to work. Right. Cause you're never going to allow your conscious is never going to allow your subconscious to truly believe that you're worthy of whatever's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but some of those things are real, right? It's not to say that it doesn't have an effect, right? Obviously, if you
Oh, for
grow up and
sure.
your parents talk about money or they don't talk about money, but I always like to tell people, like, I think people, when they see me or they hear my end result, they kind of just assume, oh, well, and then they go, well, I bet, right? And I'm like,
Right.
actually, no, they didn't talk about money. Like, actually, my degree, like, didn't help me at all. Actually, I might even be richer, right? If I wouldn't have paid, tens of thousands of dollars to go to college or whatever. But so, yeah, I think that's another thing for people too, where, I didn't really have that growing up, but I was still able to kind of obviously do what I did, even starting later
Yeah.
down the road.
Well, and what was it? What do you think, 18-year-old Tyler deciding I'm going to go into finance, I'm going to study that. What do you think motivated that? Was it something that, like, just from hearing about your parents talking about saving, or like did you just kind of have a curiosity for it from a young age?
To be honest, I have no clue. Uh,
You're like, this seems like the smart thing to do. I don't know.
I mean, when you're 17, 18 years old and you ask a child, which is what
Right.
I was, to say, "Hey, what do you want to do for the rest of your life?" I think it's just an
Right.
abs. It's like you have to, right? Because you have to study something, right? And then, but it's why you don't have to, right? That was actually me, I guess, being a product of the system right there.
For
How
sure.
deeply
Right.
ingrained it is. Like, you don't have to. Like, I think like a better idea would probably be, if it was possible, to like take a year off or take 2 years in between high school and college, and like just like try out, like, basically the 7 different parts of a business, like, marketing, accounting, leadership, management, like, HR, human resources, whatever, and explore more. Because when you're a kid, you don't know what you want. I think so. For me, it was more like, hey, I got good grades, I'm trying to just get into a good school. What's something that I could probably get into that would be a good career field where, excuse me, I could make, decent money and have a good career, right? And so
Yeah.
finance seemed like
Like a
the
ticket,
thing to do.
like, yeah, it's like you can't go wrong with this one. So that, yeah, that it's funny because it's like, yeah, I don't know, it was just the luck of the draw, but it clearly, because after college, you go into something related to finance? Because eventually you were a real estate agent, right?
No, no. So right when I got towards the end of college, I
Uh-huh.
went to literally a random career fair, and I met a guy who I was like best friends with his brothers. It was his older brother, who was maybe 3 or 4 years older than us. And he was just there. And I just started talking to him because I saw him, right? And I knew him. So, and I was like, what's this company you're working for? And it was like a healthcare staffing agency. So they kind of help nurses and therapists
Mhm.
find travel jobs. And I was like, I don't even know what, that's a funny thing too. Like when you're in college or in high school, there's so many like things and industries, and
You
you're
don't
just
even know
like, I don't even know what
exists.
this is.
Yeah.
And I was literally just talking to him because he was a friend of mine. He was like, oh, like, I was like, what do you guys do? He's like, I don't know. I started working here like a week or two ago. And he's like, I had the career fair. He worked at like another similar company. So he had like an idea, but he was just started working there. And he's like, I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, well, we're giving out internships. I'm like, well, I need to like make some money, towards the end of college, just get some experience doing anything. I had a couple internships up to that point. But yeah, so I took a job with them, and that was like my last semester. And then I graduated. And it's funny, like I don't even really remember looking for, other jobs or anything. And I just kind of kept going with that company. And my thought was, and I guess this is the background behind it. So right when I graduated college, people ask, like, what's the first thing you did like on this journey? The first thing before anything was focusing on trying to keep my expenses as low as possible, to kind of give me flexibility to make choices and career choices that might even be a little bit considered riskier. Because I mean, this is, I guess, for example, I was in a fraternity in college, and then my last year I was president, and then they have somebody who lives in the fraternity house. It's like a kind of like an RA, like a resident advisor or whatever. And so that role or that guy had moved out. And so I graduated and continued to live in the fraternity house for 2 years while I started my career, which I tell people is the best thing and worst thing I've ever done in my life, because I didn't pay rent for 2 years. I didn't have utilities for 2 years. Any sort of housing related expense I didn't have. I mean, I was using old furniture or whatever, right? So, and the only thing I was really paying for was maybe food during that time. My
That's
car was
amazing.
old and pay off. And so,
That's
yeah. And,
it's
and what
like
it
such
allowed
a
me to do,
I was
that
just gonna say it's such a different type of house hack. It's like
well, it's funny because like people ask me about that, I talk about real estate and I'm like, do you ever house hack? And I was like, honestly, I learned about real estate too late, but I kind of did it without the whole like cool part or the really cool part,
right.
which is like owning a house, and getting appreciation and owning the asset, maybe renting it out down the road, stuff like that. But
Right.
for me, I lived there and then I moved in with my girlfriend and then we bought a house. And then that's kind of when I started learning about real estate. So I would have definitely, if I could have gone back, I would have done that probably at that time, but it kind of almost served a similar purpose besides living with, having to live with 30 monkeys instead of, maybe 2 or 3 people in a duplex or triplex.
Right.
But what that allowed me to do, like I said, I don't even know what my monthly expenses were, like maybe $500. I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what I had insurance. And so what that allowed me to do, the job I took out of school was a starting salary of $30,000 a year, which is, not enough to, even live off of nowadays. But it put me in a situation where if I had if I was like my friends, and let's say I went downtown and got an apartment that was $1,000 or $1,500 a month or whatever, I probably would have had to take a job that was maybe $50,000 or $60,000 a year, but probably something that was more like salary, more fixed. Probably wouldn't have been able to grow it as much. And so I just think like that one decision right there, even though I didn't know it at the time, I might not even be speaking to you on this podcast if that would have gone a little bit differently. And so, like I said, the first thing was just focus on, lowering my expenses as much as possible so I can take a job that, even though it's $30,000 a year, it's more sales focused
Mhm.
to where I can control and scale my income. And so over the course of the next 5 to 6 years, instead of, like I said, in that one situation where if I would have had to take a $50,000 a year job, in 5, 6 years, I might have been making 70 or 80, maybe
Yeah.
max like 90. I don't know. And that would have probably required switching jobs and stuff as well. But with the sales job, I was able in that first year, I think I ended up probably around 60. And then the next year was 100, then 150, then 200, then 250.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing.
and so it was one of those things where I never planned to get in this industry, but I kind of saw a path where I'm like, okay, these people here are
Yeah.
making like, $100,000, which the first thing I wanted at the time, like when I first graduated, I remember like, if I can just make $100,000 a year, like I'll be set for life. Like that was
Yeah.
I don't know, like, that's just what I thought.
Right. Which I mean,
And
to be fair, 10 years ago, probably. I mean,
well,
you
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, but like, there's so much obviously now, like we both know there's just so much more to
You
like
can yeah, you can dream bigger.
yeah, just what's possible. And then, we talk about financial freedom and, then maybe even a spouse or future kids. Like, it was
For
funny
sure.
though. Like that was like my first thing. So that's
Oh,
what I
yeah.
focused on. And I could
Mhm.
see people at that company that were doing that. And that's what I tell people too, that are like looking for a new career path or, or maybe they're coming out of college or whatever, is you want to go find companies and roles that you think like you might be able to get to wherever it is that you're trying to go, as far as like what earning potential you're looking for. And what
Mhm.
earning potential are you looking for? Well, typically, like if your expenses are $40,000 a year and you want to be investing $30,000 per year, this is obviously a very simplified example, then you want to try to be making, 70, $80,000 a year. And you also want to be able to see a path that is controllable somewhat and scalable over time. And I think what a lot of people do, they get in a job where they don't really know why they're there. Maybe they pick their major at 18 years old and that determined the career path they went into, and they realize, A, it's something they don't even really like, and they're not getting paid enough. And there's like no, like they kind of get stuck in a dead end, whether it's a dead end industry or a dead end company or both. And so I always try to tell people, you got to at least be able to see like that yellow brick road. That doesn't always mean
Right.
that, hey, like I'm gonna, there's one guy at this company making $250,000 a year. That doesn't mean that you're gonna be that guy or girl, but you have to at least have a path, because a lot of people are at a situation where it's like, oh, well, I want to make $100,000 a year. I'm like, well, how many people are making $100,000 like in your role at your
Right.
company? It's like
In your
no one. And
industry.
so it's
Right.
like we got to at least be able to say like,
Like
I tell
reverse
people,
engineer
yeah,
it.
reverse engineer exactly.
Well, and I think it's what I want to highlight about one of the things that you said is that you chose a job that had a lower pay, but had a much higher potential for income growth that you controlled. Whereas, like you said, in all those other positions where you wouldn't have had to do sales potentially, and it would have been potentially more comfortable, you would have been making more, but the growth rate would have been so much slower. There's no way in a regular, like, project manager position, unless you were switching jobs every year, you would go from 50 grand to $250,000 in like 3 or 4 years. Like, that's not going to happen unless you're this stellar performer or switching jobs all of the time. But when it's sales, which also getting sales skills from such a young age is priceless. That's going to follow you to whatever else you do throughout your life. And you were in control of it. So I think that's like something we skip and we like forget about. And it's the same thing with like real estate, becoming a realtor, doing anything that you have this opportunity to not have to trade your time for money. It's like you made that happen because you were willing to take those sacrifices of living in a frat house for a couple extra years and, learning those skill sets. I remember even, at that time in my life too, hearing about the sales jobs and hearing those lower salaries, but this potential for commission. And it always scared me. It was like, nah, I can't do that. That's too scary. What if I only make 30 grand? But had I done things over, I think that's one of the routes I might have considered just because of that potential for extreme growth.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that for me, because I was like living in I'm actually pretty risk averse, which most people when they look at me now, it's something I've had to kind of unlearn. It's probably because of my mom. I love her to death, but she's like the classic mom, like worry wart, like, and it's probably most of the reason why I've had anxiety my entire life. And so I've always kind of avoided things or been I think fear and anxiety has a place in our life. It can help us and protect us in certain cases, but I would say that more times than not, it's hurting us more than it's helping us. But there are things that you can do to try to take away the risk of a particular situation. And so, like I said, for me, I was like, all right, well, I was like kind of deathly afraid of doing it too, but I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? If I live in the fraternity house and I need like $500 a month to live, right? So
Yeah.
like,
It
I was making
emboldens you.
even if I made $30,000 and the only thing I was really risking was probably time, but
Mhm.
like when you're 22, that, there's no shortage of that. So I'm like, you know what, this is kind of my time to take a little bit more risk. And worst case scenario, I'm 24, right? And a lot of people don't get out of, their MBA or they change career paths when they're 26, 28, 30, whatever. I'm like, and so why did I have that idea from the beginning? I don't know. Sometimes I think it was almost lucky in a sense, like
Yeah.
that I was thinking about these things, but I think that actually came out of anxiety, right? So like, all
Right.
right, well, hey, like a normal person probably been like, oh, well, I'm just gonna go get an apartment and take this $30,000 a year job. And that puts you in a situation where if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, it's gonna, maybe put you two steps back, where you're having to climb out of a hole. So I think there's
Oh,
a
so
little bit of
true.
balance.
Yeah, I mean, especially too, like you said, that put you in a position that you could take that risk and you were actually comfortable with that risk. So it's like it's a calculated risk. I mean, that's the kind of risk we want to be taking. And yeah, I think about that a lot even now as I know you just moved. You moved from I think Florida to Tennessee, right?
Yep.
So I've been thinking about that a lot on my move as well, of just being like, well, I was planning on moving to San Diego, but the more and more I thought about it, it was like, this just doesn't seem like the smartest move for me right now when I'm still a new business. The few things I can control in terms of my costs, there's a lot of things in the business that I have to spend money on in order
Yeah.
for like me to reach the goals, but I can control my cost of living. That's it. That's what I can control. And moving to San Diego, it's just like I feel like my stress levels would triple. So I decided to move to Tucson instead, which I'm very excited about.
Do you ever think about, is this something that I kind of think about sometimes? There's this like thought where some people will take that step or like the more risky one in kind of hopes that stress or anxiety drives them to figure it out. I think there's a balance there too. Like obviously it's like, don't go buy like a private jet, like, but like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It's just something I've
I
thought about too.
Oh yeah, I definitely think it depends on what type of person you are. So for me, when I'm stressed, I feel like I make worse business decisions
Uh-huh.
or I'm not able to think about things long term. I'm thinking about like what is like the solution to right now. So having that piece of being able to make a decision from a place of security rather than from a place of urgency and anxiety helps is better for me. Have there been times in my life where I've been able to perform at a very high level because of the stress involved? Yeah, but then I'm miserable like all the time.
Yeah.
So, it's I think it's finding that balance. I was actually talking to my friend Meg Wheeler on the podcast not that long ago, and I had asked her, and I'm actually going to ask you as well. So, when I quit my job, kind of similar to how you had set yourself up to be able to take a $30,000 a year job with lower risk, when I was preparing to quit my job, I saved up an entire year emergency fund because I was like,
Mhm.
if I'm going to take this risk, not only do I have to prove to myself that I can make this amount of income for this period of time before I do this, but
Mhm.
I also want to have a year emergency fund so that I'm never in this situation where I have to make a bad decision because I need money. And when I was telling Meg about that, I was like, what is your opinion for, small business owners? What do you think they should aim for an emergency fund? And she's like, I've worked with business owners who need to only have like a 1 to 3 month emergency fund to keep a fire under them, like to make sure that they're staying hungry, essentially. So for me, I don't function as well that way. At least I don't want to function that way anymore, which is why I opt for the more safer route. But what about you? For you, like when you were preparing to quit your job, what kind of position were you in?
Well, before that, you also kind of brought up a good point. Something I tell people too is like in any sort of negotiation, whether it's sales or a raise or anything, the more desperate person always loses.
Yep.
And so I think that when you have, in your situation, you're talking about 6 months or 12 months, if you have that saved up and you're like, all right, if you only have 1 to 3 months, like you said, you might have to make a decision where it's like, it's not the best decision, but it's like whichever one's going to like put food on the table, so to speak,
Right.
for the short term, and same thing with people with, asking for raises. And I'm like, well, they're like, well, what if my, boss says no? I'm like, well, like if you're in a situation when you actually have to stay there and then you're like basically like threatening to leave, but you can't leave because you need that job and you don't have other, opportunities or anything like that, then, in that, desperate's kind of a bad word, but like you're more desperate. I don't know how else to say it.
You're
So
vulnerable in
yeah,
that
yeah.
situation. Yeah.
And so like by creating, having other opportunities, if we're talking about asking for a raise, and that way it's like, hey, like I think you get a raise more times than not if you're like, hey, I love this place, I love staying here, but I do have other opportunities and they're willing to pay me this, and you're not lying about it, it's real. Then that will put you in a better situation. And so yeah, you brought up a good point. But for me, with the business, I wanted to see a few things. One, I had some personal things going on in life. I was engaged and had a wedding coming up, and those are not cheap. And so I wanted to make sure like that kind of got all figured out. And then I was planning, actually, I was going to quit before that in November. We talked about that, but something came up with the Instagram account and kind of decided not to. But the reason why I was going to originally do it in November is because firstly, I wanted to get to a point where, I was bringing in enough money from the business in order to, not only obviously cover all the business expenses, but cover all the business expenses and my personal expenses and probably a little bit of a buffer. And
Mhm.
not only just do it in 1 month, but do it consistently, like month over month for six
Yep.
to 8 months. And then you also need like a plan to control and scale that income. So obviously, if I was making 6 to 8 months of of that money, but I was in the newspaper business, like then that would not be a good idea, right? So
Right.
it's got to be in something that you're going to continue to grow and scale, because even if your business expenses are 2,000 a month and your personal are 4,000 a month or whatever, right? They might move up to, instead of 6,000 a month, it might be 7 or 8 or 9, right? So I
Mhm.
always thought like, I want to at least have a plan to be able to grow and scale that. But on the back end behind that, I've got enough between, rental income and money in the stock market, money in savings account. There's plenty of money to where, I mean, I could not make money for probably 10 years. Obviously, it's not the
Worry. Right.
goal,
Right.
right? But it wasn't for me. I think the reason was like I was kind of going the route before I even got on social media. Like I was a millionaire before I got on social media. And honestly, like social media is very tiny percentage of my net worth, if anything, just because I've invested pretty much almost everything back into what I'm doing and people and stuff like that with the hopes of growing it bigger. But for me, my original plan was through real estate and through the stock market. And, I would have got there probably another year, 2, 3 anyways. So I had pretty much got to that point. But then the question that I got to was, well, why am I doing all of this? Like, what is the point? What is the real point of everything that I'm doing?
Yeah.
And the point is not for me to retire. The point is not for me to, yeah, I might play a little bit more golf than I did before, but it's more about what do I want to be doing on a daily basis that allows me to, I guess, be the fullest extent of myself while also ideally monetizing it or making money to, afford whatever lifestyle that I want as well. And so, I was in a situation where I was like, all right, well, I'm making this much money from social media kind of on the side. And I was making $25,000 a month for my job too.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I only need like 4 or 5,000 a month, if that. And so I was like, why am I doing this? Right. Like
Yeah.
it was almost like that fear and anxiety where it was starting to tip the scale on the negative side, where it was like, I don't need $35,000 a month or whatever it is, And so it's like, why? And two, why don't I just stop what I'm doing and focus? What could I do with this social media business if I wasn't working for 50 hours a week doing something that I enjoy the people, but I didn't really enjoy the thing. And the
Yeah.
biggest thing was the flexibility where, we talked about it. I wouldn't be living in Tennessee if I was still working a job. I've taken off more days for sure in the last year than I took off 7 years while working, as far as going to different places and different experiences over the last year and a half with my wife, with my parents, with my,
Yeah.
wedding and honeymoon and stuff, things that I could never imagine not doing or having been part of my life. And it kind of makes you think, well, shit, should I have done this like maybe a little bit sooner? But
And we can't dwell on
yeah,
that, right?
there's a little bit of balance though. I think the biggest
Yeah.
thing is just like making sure the revenue is where it needs to be in order to, cover all expenses plus a buffer on a consistent basis with a plan to scale it.
Well, and it just keeps going back to, I think this is just such a good highlight and example of the power of living below your means, because the power of living below your means is flexibility. It gives you options. And that's something all of us, well, I always struggle when I say like all of us, because I know everybody's got extenuating circumstances. The goal is to be able to do that, though. The goal is to be able to live below your means, where that is. So as you were talking about, like, yeah, and then I was a millionaire even before I started my Instagram account. I was like, we got to talk about how you became a millionaire. I'm like, we can't leave our audience hanging. So you came to this conclusion when you were pretty early in your career that you were like, this is not how I want to live my life. And so that it sounds like that was the impotence to make you dive really deep into personal finance and learning how to invest in the stock market and eventually real estate. Can you kind of tell us what were some of the steps along the way to get you to such a high net worth at such a young age?
Yeah. So I think it was kind of a combination, it's kind of the system, I guess, that I mostly teach when I tell people, like, the main, I guess, class that I have is a financial freedom masterclass, and it's kind of set up about my story kind of. And so, yeah, I think that because a lot of people will say, hey, teach me how to invest in real estate. I'm like, all right, well, what's your budget look like? And they're like, I don't have one. I'm like, probably not going to help you out, hey, I want to invest in the stock market. I'm like, well, how much money do you make? Well, I make $30,000 a year. Like, well, I mean, I can teach you and it's helpful to know, but it's like, you have to have the income, you got the expenses, you got to have, you got to understand debt, credit, savings. And then you've got to pick some sort of at least one investment vehicle between stocks, real estate, and business. So for me, that was a piece by piece process. And so a lot of people that are hearing this might think, oh, this guy just read a couple books in like 2015 and just like had the whole thing figured out and then built it. But reality, it was like, I just they say life is kind of like a river bend. You don't really know what the end of the river looks like. You just get to the next bend and then you can see the next bend. And then you can see the next bend. And so for me, the first bend was lowering my expenses. Check. That was immediate through the things that we already talked about. The second thing was try to make as much money as possible. And so I was in a sales job, right? So that just really was about meeting people at my company in different industries that were doing well at whatever it was and trying to learn from them and kind of take the best parts of all those different people. And then really just kind of doing the stuff we talked about at the very beginning, between the difference between knowledge and action, the action part. I mean, I showed up early. I left late. Like I was there every day. I didn't miss work. I didn't take days off, like mentally, all those things for a long time, which allowed me to grow that, because not everybody at my company took that same route. Very few people, if any, did. So it was really about focusing like, hey, what's like the most important thing? And like for me, I think that it's really your income. Your income is, if we're talking about building wealth fast, it's about building your income. The more money that you have to invest, of course, the easier and faster that you can get to wherever you're trying to go. And so for me, I'm like, if I'm spending 50 hours a week doing this thing, right? And you spend what, I don't know, 50 or 60 sleeping, right? And then, like the work is the thing that you're doing more than anything else all week. And so a lot of people will focus on like side hustles or like learning about the stock market, real estate. All those things are important. But for me, I'm like, I'm spending the largest chunk of my life working. I want that to be the most efficient earning vehicle that I can, which was the sales job. Because I'm spending all my time on it anyways, I might as well try to, make the most out of that. And so,
Yeah. No, I want to highlight that because I think that's so important. I think so many people immediately, when they think about increasing their income, their first thought, because it's so popularized on the internet and Instagram and TikTok, people are always talking about side hustles. But sometimes we completely overlook the potential in our regular 9 to 5. It's like, to me, it's the 80/20. It's like, well, if 20% of your efforts are causing 80% of the impact, focus on that 20%. And for a lot of us, that 20% is the 9 to 5. There's so many opportunities there. And if there aren't, that's a problem. And it's like, okay, you got to figure out, how do I get to this next level where I am in a position or I am in an industry where there is this potential for growth. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's so important. And it's something that's accessible to a lot of us rather than
yeah,
having to start something completely new from scratch.
100%. I think there's a lot of people that, whether it's a raise your current company or switching companies, or some people even might need to switch industries if it's something that's not serving them anymore. That right there could be 10, 15, 20. I mean, I've had people in some of my classes that have gotten 25, $30,000 raises or from either switching a company or asking their boss while
Yeah.
still in the class. And so like, what's a $30,000? That's like a $2,500 a month side hustle. Like that's pretty difficult to do. And even if you did do that, it would probably take you a while to work that up, or you'd have to be
And more
working your
hours.
job and yes, and
Exactly.
driving Uber until 3 a.m. and then sleeping 2 hours or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
So for me, it was more about focusing my time and attention mostly on my job because it was set up to be a good earning. The more time you put in, the more you're going to get out of it as long as you do well at the job. And then for me, it was learning about, okay, now I've got cash flow, right? That's like kind of step 2 or 3, like, but lower your expenses, raise your income. Now there's money left over. Now, what do you do with that money? And so immediately I was like, I need to get this invested into the stock
Mhm.
market, which was mostly, index funds or even like tech, like NASDAQ, kind of like index funds, mostly focused there. And it was mostly just about me going to work and then just investing as much as I possibly could for 2, 3, 4 years. So I just started learning about real estate through books, through courses, online, YouTube, etc. And just got to the point where I was just practicing every day for a few months as far as I would go on either like Zillow or LoopNet or the MLS, just all these places where properties were, and just kind of run the numbers on them. And just like whenever something come in, I would put it through my calculator, and I would start to just get a really good feel for, what I was looking for, why I was looking for it, was it a good property or not a good property, and just kind of, I think too many people, they think like, oh, if I learn about real estate, then I'm going to have to buy a property within like 30 days. And that kind of gives me like anxiety. It's like, no, like even if you did this and didn't buy a property at all, it would still be beneficial for you to like get in and learn this and just like,
Yeah.
and it's just free practice, right? So just
Right.
practice on real properties that are like coming in and just knowing like, yeah, I don't have to make an offer on this. There's no pressure. There's no anxiety around this. This is a good learning experience. And then eventually I got to the point where I was like, all right, well, I'm ready to go. And so I liquidated some of my stock investments to buy my first triplex. And then I was able to do what's called a burr. It's it's kind of like flipping a house. So just like with a flip, you buy it, you fix it up, and then you sell it. A burr is you buy it, you fix it up, which is the second R. So it's BR, it's 4 R's.
Mhm.
Buy, rehab, rent it out, refinance. And the goal with refinancing is, because it is a much higher valuation now because you fixed it out or fixed it up, you should be able to refinance and pull out probably all of your, or close to all of your original investment that you can then take and go buy another
Buy
property.
another one. Mhm. And do the
And
same thing
so,
over.
yeah, so that's what I did with the first one. The first one actually didn't need much work at all. So it was just a great starter burr, I guess you could call it. And then the second one I did was a full gut kind of rehab and stuff. So after a couple years, that left me with 7 units plus my primary home. So obviously there's money coming in. I'm still at that point again, while this is going on, going from 50 to 100 to 150 to 200 to 250 to 250, 300 probably in the last year. So I'm continuing to raise my income. I'm continuing to keep my expenses relatively low. Like they went up a little bit, but
Yeah.
not like I wasn't out, buying Benzes and I don't know, whatever
Right.
people buy. I don't know. And so all those things, again, it's kind of almost, you could imagine it like a stack, right? Like, so it's just like the situation is getting better and better because I'm keeping my expenses low. My income is going up and up. My stocks are going up and up. My real estate investments and properties that I own are going up and up. And that's just kind of creating a snowball where now there's money coming in from stocks and dividends. There's money coming in from rental properties. There's even more money than before coming in from my 9 to 5 income. Then eventually, of course, I started, social media money's coming in from that as well. So it kind of creates this snowball where there's much more income, of course, coming in than is going out. And you're able to kind of just pour that back into investments where, I mean, the example we just gave, that second rental property, in a way, if you want to look at it like this, pretty much came from the first rental property. Right.
Right.
So that first rental property essentially bought me another one. And so it's kind of cool, obviously when you start investing, there's just more money getting flown into the same system that's just creating more and more. So that's kind of, I guess, the story as far as, just raising my income, and so like, yeah, people might be like, oh, well, you're making 250, 300,000. But yeah, we've already talked about, how we got there and why. And that definitely wasn't easy. And I never say like, oh, well, it was easy what I did, right? It took a lot of work, took a lot of effort, but it is possible. You just got to make sure that you are lining yourself up with, again, that yellow brick road or whatever you want to call it, where you can see, all right, after year 1, after year 2, 4, 6, whatever, I can see how I can get there. And then it's just kind of more about executing on the plan.
Yeah.
But at least you have something where you can see how the path to get there.
100%. Well, and like the first step is figuring out what are you even interested in? Like, what is the route you want to go? Because there's so many different ways to do it, whether it's building your income, pursuing wealth building from an investing standpoint, whether you go stocks, real estate, building a business, whatever those things are, you just got to know yourself and figure out which one of those interests you the most and is most aligned with like your ideal version of life. I love it. I love it too, because you like so often you get people who are only like stock market people or only real estate people. And I love talking to people who are like, yeah, I do both. Like both of them are important parts of what my wealth building has become. All right. I got a couple more questions for you and then we'll let you go. But my first one is I was looking at your Instagram right before I logged in and I was like, ooh, I'm going to ask Tyler this. What is your answer to, hey, the real estate market right now is kind of crazy, Tyler. It's still going nuts and interest rates are just climbing up. Is now a good time to buy? What is your answer to that?
So I think the first thing is to kind of clarify what that specific person's situation is and what they're talking about. If we're talking about buying a primary home, that would be one answer. If you're talking about buying rental properties, that could be 10 different answers. If we're talking about a long-term buy and hold, if we're talking about a fix and flip, if we're talking about Airbnb, these different things. So I'll kind of break down a couple of them.
Okay.
Primary home, it's kind of first, before I even talk about whether it's a good time or not, it's about, is buying a primary home at all the right thing for you to do? I think a lot of people feel like it's like, well, I'm throwing my money away to rent or whatever, which is partially true, but that's not if it's an equation, that's just one of the, it's been a long time since algebra, but one of the little things that's in the equation. Yes. And, I rent right now, right? Because I've determined that for me right now in my life, all the variables that add up, even with factoring that in, for me, the answer is to rent right now. So if you don't know where you're going to live for the next probably 5, 7+ years at least, you probably need to rent, unless you have some sort of exit strategy, like hey, I'm going to house hack for 2 or 3 years and then I'm going to move and rent it out or something like that. A lot of people, if you don't have the money for a down payment to where you'd be able to afford the house, then you need to be renting. A lot of people don't understand, if you haven't owned a house, all the work that is involved. You either have to do it or you have to pay someone to do it. And either way, whether it's time or it's money, it's expensive. I did the math on, I think my house, the payment ish was about $2,000 a month. But when I factored in the floors that were $10,000, the septic tank that blew up within 3 weeks of us moving in there,
Oh my God.
the pool, the extra things that come with the house, lawn care, because I have allergies, so I'm not cutting my yard anyways. All that stuff built up over the 4 or 5 years that we owned it. Our Instead of 2,000, our rent was probably closer to 3,200 to 3,500 per
And that's
month.
something people don't take into consideration.
And so I heard this before. I think it's like kind of if you've heard it, you won't be mind blown, but if you haven't, you might be. Your rent is the absolute highest that you're going to pay per month. Your mortgage payment is the absolute lowest that you're going to pay per month. And I think
Yes.
it's kind of a good way of looking at it. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that renting's the right answer, but it's about kind of factoring in all these things about, the renting is more, flexibility, and it might also give you a better location. Like for us, my wife right now, part of it was, hey, we've lived in the suburbs for 4 or 5 years. We got married. We might, a kid might be the next thing. Right now, what's our most important thing is just experience, right? Just
Yeah.
straight up, like it's selfish. Is our experience over the next 1 or 2 years before we maybe have a kid. So we're moving downtown. You can't buy a house downtown, and so plus it's a lot of work. It's a ton of work for anyone
Mhm.
that hasn't owned a house. And so that would be as far as whether or not you should buy a primary home. Now, as far as should you buy one right now or not, I think interest rates are interesting time right now, because if they raise the interest rates too much, like the whole economy and stock market and everything's just going to crash. If they raise it to 9, 10, 11%, but if they lower it, then it's almost like going to kind of speed up this inflation, which is finally starting to come down. I think it was 5% this morning or something. So I don't really foresee it ever getting back to like 2 or 3%. That was literally like a hyper emergency breaking case of emergency kind of situation. So really it comes down to the fundamentals, which is what I'll talk about with the primary homes and the rental properties, which is, regardless of the landscape of the economy and all this stuff, does it fit in mathematically to what you're doing, right? So like, do you have the 20% down payment? Is it going to be, some people say 30% of your gross income for your housing payment. I mean, I think that's probably like on the upper end. Obviously the lower the better.
Yeah.
And some people, the issue why they have an issue with it is because they're kind of having to come to terms with, well, I just can't afford like the house that I might have been able to afford a year ago, 2 years ago. And there's nothing that we can do to control that as individuals, right? Like obviously there was a once in a lifetime, hopefully, pandemic and all kinds of stuff that came along as a result of that. And so it's just about kind of saying like, figuring out what you can afford and sticking with that. And if that if you can find a house and where you want in that area or at that price point, then go with it. And if not, then you might have to get creative, whether that's moving maybe to a different, like you said, to maybe a different city. I know yours wasn't that same exact scenario, but moving to somewhere
Well,
that's maybe,
it is partially that,
you
because
know,
one of the things I realized in the last couple of months is that I want to buy a house. Like I want to do that. I'm tired of not having a place to like set roots in, and I'm like
yeah,
just ready for that part of my life. And that was one of the things that San Diego just there's no way I'd be able to buy anything livable in San Diego, So it was just like Tucson, here we go, 5 hours
yeah.
away.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, it's all about kind of just alignment, like for me and you, like we could be making the opposite decision, but they're both right. As long as it's truly about what we want, right? Which we can only
Completely
define
agree.
that. But, when it comes to some of these other things, I think with rental properties, you could think about it similarly to index funds in the stock market. People say like, oh, like, should I buy stocks right now? And I'm like, what's the S&P 500 at? I don't know. I don't even look at it, to be honest.
'Cause you don't
3,500,
need to.
4,000. But it's like, what's, 4,000, you put that in a compound interest calculator. You say, I'm not going to put any money. Just imagine like what for that $4,000 is going to be worth if goes up 10, 11% on average over the course of the next 30 years. I did the math the other day. I don't want to butcher this, but it's probably going to be close to like 30,000, 35,000. I don't know, something like that in 30, 40 years. And so it's like every $4,000 you put in, every one share that you were to buy, it's immediately $35,000 when you need it, right? It's like, who gives a shit if it's 38? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on here. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're
3,800.
fine. We are explicit.
It's a podcast, baby. 3,700, 4,200, 3,900. Who cares? Who cares? We're talking about $35,000. Like it doesn't matter, and real estate's similar. You want to buy properties that have, usually a particular cash flow amount. per month so that you're never having to come out of pocket. The property sustaining itself and you're making money from it. You're typically looking for cash on cash returns, specific percentages and things like that. So the answer is fundamentally, if it still checks off all those boxes, right? These deals might be a little bit harder to find. You might have to look in different areas. You might have to get more creative. But if you find deals that check all your boxes, then you're planning on holding it for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Then I don't really care if the market's going to dip 10% in the next 6 months or whatever, because I'm holding it as a cash flow and long-term wealth building machine. When we talk about fixing and flipping, something more short-term, those are areas where people could, get bit a little bit more right now, where you're buying something and you're, for 300,000, you're putting in 50,000 with the hopes that you're going to be able to sell it for 450,000. But, if you catch a market dip in the 5-6 months it takes to fix up the house, you might end up breaking even or worse in those short-term situations. Same thing with trading a stock. It's the same. It's just real estate and the stocks. It's similar principles. So the short-term ones, can be more difficult right now with interest rates and things like that. The longer-term things, they might be a little bit harder to find, but as long as you stick to the fundamentals with a long-term time horizon, then it doesn't really matter as much.
Yeah. And I mean, it just goes back to what we say a lot is you have to know your numbers. And if the numbers work, then it doesn't matter what time it is. If the numbers work, then the numbers work. So it's learning how to run those numbers. Okay. Before we wrap up, what are rapid round? What would you say for somebody who is starting at the beginning and they're like, I want to build wealth. I don't know where to begin. I don't know how, what steps I should take. What would you say your top 3 quick tips are for somebody starting out?
I would say make education a part of your daily routine, at least an hour, and figure out a way to put it in there. When I was starting off, I mean, I almost said I couldn't read. I can read, but I like.
When I was 25, I couldn't even read.
But I always wanted to read books. I read in college because in college it's fake world and you have unlimited time and nothing is real.
Yeah.
But when you get into the real world, I just struggled to find time to read a hard copy physical book. And so I got Audible, and my drive to work was 30, 45 minutes. So, maybe an hour and a half round trip. And you put that dude on, 2x speed or whatever you can handle. And you can read 2 books a week just by, what I would do is 80% reading, then 20% vibes whenever I'm arriving somewhere, so a little bit of a mix to where you don't I'm getting in a car and I got to read, but it's you want to do something that you let your curiosity kind of decide where you go with it. So it's not you feel like you're taking a college test. So educate yourself. 2, I would say get around people that have similar goals as you. You really need 3 people in your life. It's 3 groups of people, I guess. You need people that are above you in whatever area that you want, so that they can teach you. You need people on your own level to either collaborate and or compete with. And you need people that are underneath you to practice your teaching and knowledge of your subject, and also to help bring them up and further future generations. The third one, I would just say, not to get sappy, but believe in yourself. And I know it's kind of cliche, but I think that so many people, I spend more time breaking down people's bullshit than teaching them the things they need to know. And as I alluded to earlier in the talk, it's if you've already got these preconceived notions of how the world works and why you're not special and why you're not worthy, or someone told you that, and that's what you've always believed, then we can't go anywhere until you put that down.
Right.
It's people have talked about, it's a kind of a stress example. It's stress is like a glass of water, or it could be trauma, it could be whatever, stress or trauma, same thing. If you hold out a glass in front of you like this, for 5 seconds, it's not heavy. But if you've ever held out a glass full arm, it doesn't take but 45 seconds before your whole body shuts down, and all you got to do is just put the fucking glass down, and it's so simple, but it's so missed, and we hold on to these things because they become part of our identity. And it's almost kind of a way for us to say, well, this is the reason why I haven't maybe done what I've wanted to do, is because I've always had this thing. And so although we hate it, it also becomes a crutch in a sense, whatever our things are. And so it's really just about getting inside of your head through meditation, through reading, through going to therapy. These are all things I've done multiple times over. I mean, meditation daily. I've gone to therapy. I've gone to everything over the last 10 years. because we've all got stuff going on inside of us. And if we don't take the time to figure it out, it's going to come out. And the way that it comes out when you don't decide when it comes out, it's
Yep.
going to be a lot worse. Right. So
Yes.
just doing that internal work and figuring out, not in a judgmental way, but just knowing that, hey, I'm going to go find out who I am and why I tick and why I think the way I think, because I know that the answers to my dreams and goals kind of lie within that. So it's kind of an exciting journey as opposed to oh, this is anxious, going to be digging skeletons out of my closet or whatever. It's more so just like I get to build myself and who I want to be.
I love it. And I just got to shout out, like, we have a man on the podcast saying therapy. Like, that's
Oh,
so
yeah.
cool. I love
Oh, yeah.
that. I mean, it's such a stigma in general. I think it's definitely no longer the stigma that it used to be, but like specifically for men, there's been just so an uphill battle in getting men to believe in therapy and understand that it's not, it's not anything less masculine to go to therapy. It says a lot, like in terms of your willingness to work on yourself. And so many people need it. So I just got to shout you out for that. We love that here.
I think 100% of human beings on earth, regardless of sex, gender, have shit going on in their lives. And it's just really just talking about it,
Yep.
And I think that I heard a stat the other day, we have 90,000 thoughts and about 98% of them are the same exact thoughts that we had the day before. And so
my God, that's depressing.
It's like the way your subconscious works, and like I've just over the last few days, I've kind of spent more time really just becoming aware of like certain things that happen, right? Like I might have a meeting and I might be like, like when I come on here, like I might, even though like, we're friends, like I might still have a little bit of anxiety about this. And then you're like, why?
Yeah.
You're like, why? Like, is this serving me? Right. Is this emotion that I want to feel right now? And if it's not the emotion I want to feel, then what emotion do I want to feel? Right. And it's really kind of as simple as just becoming aware and all that stuff. And because I tell people like, although I talk about money and all that stuff, like at the end of the day, you're building wealth so that like if you ask why as many times, like the annoying second grader, like it all comes down to like being happy is kind of like the point. And of course you could be happy without money, but money can, I think, help take away a lot of the financial stresses of life. Mm-hmm. But I think that we've got to live our life with although money's important, we've got to live our life with like what's actually important is just how we subjectively view ourselves and what's going on in our lives. And it's funny because the more that you work on that, the easier all this other stuff becomes anyways. So it's backwards. People think like, oh, I work hard and I get rich and then I get rich and then I'm happy. And it's like, typically it's like, I work on myself. Like I surround myself with good, loving, supportive people. I love myself. Then I work hard. Then I take the action I needed because that gives me energy and then I get rich. So it's it's backwards on how most people view things.
For sure. Awesome. Well, this was a delight. I have 2 more tiny fun questions for you, but before we get to those, tell everybody where they can find you.
So I'm on my name is Defining Wealth, my handle on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. So you guys can find me there. My name's Tyler Wright. So we'll come up with Defining Wealth. And now there used to be 30 of them because of all the fakes, but now
we have the verified.
I'm proud to say that I pay $15 a month so my followers don't get scammed. But it's a price, obviously, that I'm willing to pay. So check me out there. I have just great, obviously, free information and tools and do classes and stuff like that. If anyone's interested, you can find all that information on my page.
Awesome. And we'll put it all in the show notes as well. All right. Time for the 2 final fun questions. First question is, what is your very first money memory?
I would just say like kind of the savings portion, like I was saying earlier, just kind of like, I just remember my mom telling me like, hey, like save money. I know it's not like a great one, but that would be it for me.
Just that consistent message.
Just like always making sure to like save a little bit of, what you're doing. Right. And so I think that kind of set me on a good track.
Okay. And then this other question is, what is something you're binging right now? Now, it could be a podcast, it could be a game, it could be a book series, it could be a TV series, anything that you're like obsessed with right now.
It's funny. And this is like probably going to maybe sound like a terrible person, but like I really don't watch TV that much. Like
it's something that sound like a terrible
person. It's something like when people say they're like, oh, well, you think you're like too cool for TV or something like, and it's like, honestly, like, I don't know. I watch like a lot of sports and I watch, I watch movies and stuff with my wife, but recently though, we turn on the show and I don't know if this is 3 years old. So because I have no concept of like what's cool and what's not, but it's called The Night Agent.
Oh,
It's
that
on
just came out, I
Netflix.
think.
Okay, cool, perfect.
Yeah, see, look, you're cool.
Yeah, I'm cool. I'm
Yeah.
cool as shit. Um, that was one where like, you know, you watch like the first couple episodes and you're like, I don't know if I want to like invest in this or like if I'm gonna like this enough because everything's like, you know, 10 episodes or longer.
Yeah.
But after like 2 or 3 episodes, you know, like my wife usually will watch something from like, you know, I don't know, like 8 to 9 or 8 to 10 before we go to bed. And it was like 10 o'clock. And you know, it's like you know a series is good when you like, you know, like the episode ends and it's like, you know, it's bedtime. Everyone knows what bedtime is. And you kind of like look over at each other and you're like, yeah, one more.
Yeah, should we watch
And
one
then
more?
we
Yeah.
watched like three more, you know. So it was like midnight, and then we felt like shit the next day. So, but
Oh
I would
my
say that
God.
was the last thing that I probably binged.
All right. I love it. We got a TV episode out of him. Awesome. Well, Tyler, it was so good chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on. And we'll leave links to everything and where you can find you in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a sec to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So, got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately. And because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary. And keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So, there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, also, I've got a free investing class that is available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. We host it once a month. If you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.